Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Everybody up?
Yeah.
Check the person around. Look, anybody sleeping? Okay. What I want to do perhaps in about another half hour, so check them again, make sure that everybody remains awake. Welcome to this session today. Let me say to you, I wish to, Stephen Thompson, wish to apologize for what ended up being a communication glitch over the past 2 weeks, which I recognized after the fact that I should have been here last week, Saturday, but we had a bit of a communication glitch. But it's good to be here, and thank you all for getting out of your warm beds this morning. Somebody joining us by Skype? Okay. Okay, we're not too sure how many else gonna join us, and so we proceed. We believe that some persons may still be recuperating. That's as much as we will say on that. Persons are recuperating. But let me say to you, this course today, the session today, we hope to focus on this whole business of, in a general sense, anti-money laundering. More specifically, this business of culture and ethics and integrity and all that kinds of stuff. Let me say also, though, I wish to also commend all of you for having reached this far. And I see Ms. Deal is taking out her big binder. Let me share a few things with you right up front. One of the things I wish to share with you is that that you should not become overwhelmed by the big binder. If you look at that big binder and you look at it closely enough, you would recognize that the information isn't as overwhelming as you may think initially. As you go through it, you recognize that there's some repetition in the information, and that's not bad because it comes from different perspectives. But my first point to you is, do not become overwhelmed by the big binder. The next point I wish to share with you is that going forward, what I want us to do today is to have a discussion about this whole business of anti-money laundering. Any one of you can sit in the comfort of your home or office or wherever and read the material. And so certainly the aim is not to come here to get you out of your warm beds on a Saturday morning, to come here to read through the material. What we hope to do is to try to pull out some salient points from the material and to have a discussion about them. What we also hope to do this morning is to share with you some helpful tips towards the assignment. Anybody remember the assignment? Anybody has an assignment? There is an assignment which some of you may be finished with, some may still be working with. And what I hope to share with you today is some tips, some consideration towards that assignment. Before we go any further, I know that most of you perhaps know each other. Some of you I am seeing for the, have not been in a session that I have conducted. So just to be sure, let us just go around the room, please. Start, just say your name, these others, all of you know each other, right? No, please, go right here. I see somebody left around and say, no, I know her. I know her. Please, go ahead.
Crystal Sanders.
Crystal Sanders? Okay.
That's it?
You can say where you work if you wish. My main point, I just want to know, and the next question I was about to ask is those who are in financial services sector. Those who are working in the sector, I'd like to know that because there are certain points that we would want to focus on for those who are in the sector. It doesn't mean that a person has to be in the sector, but if you do not wish to share that at all, please go right ahead.
Crystal Sanders, Family Guardian.
Family Guardian, okay, that's in the sector.
Yes, that's right.
Okay, in law firm? That's okay, that's okay.
Carla Cartwright, RBC.
Okay.
Azul Colley, FIU, Financial Intelligence Unit.
Lillian Russell, Central Bank.
Dear Bakeward Chambers.
Baker?
Bakeward Chambers.
Okay, where's that?
Okay.
Right.
Okay. I don't be in the downtown area too much now, so I'm not sure what's down here anymore. Just by way of background, Stephen Thompson, I worked in the field of compliance for near to 30 years. Don't look at me like that now. About 30 years overall in the field of compliance. Having started off at the, well, I spent some time at the National Insurance Board, about 13 years there before going on to an insurance company which will remain unnamed today, and then a short stint there. And then I worked in the field of anti-money laundering again from the standpoint of a regulator, having worked in the Compliance Commission, regulating what we call the non-traditional financial institutions. Spent 13 years there, and then now I have been called back to assist at the National Insurance Board, and so I am back at the National Insurance Board. Still compliance, so I've actually been working with compliance for quite a bit of years. I find compliance, the area of compliance, the field of compliance to be very, very interesting. My view is that as long as you have people in the world, there will be a need for compliance officers. That means that as long as there are people in the world, every audit society has rules, regulation, guidelines. Imagine a society without traffic lights. Can anybody imagine that? Nassau bad enough now and we have traffic lights, right? But imagine a society that is totally disordered, out of order, but you need to have laws, guidelines, regulation for any audit society. Once you have laws, guidelines in place, you need somebody to ensure that people comply with those laws. And so the compliance function is very, very important. We also want to share with you that in terms of this business of anti-money laundering, I know that you would have been reading up and you are so attuned to the subject matter that all of you are comfortable with the subject matter of anti-money laundering. I want to take a few seconds though, and I don't want to insult your intelligence, but just to make sure that we know where we are. Let me talk about this business of anti-money laundering. We know that criminals are out there generating funds every day. Funds from illicit activity. Every day you have persons out there generating funds from illicit activity. Those funds that those people are generating, somehow at some point they want to get those funds into the formal financial services sector. And so they would try everything they can to launder their money, to get their money clean, to give their money the impression that it is as good as our money that we work so hard for every day. Let us consider that at the end of a business day, when the business person opens the till or cash register or whatever they keep their monies in, when they open that at the end of the day, if you look at all the $50 bills, if you look at all the $100 bills, you cannot distinguish those which came from legitimate sources from those which came from illegitimate sources. They all look alike, they all look alike, right? And so at the end of the day, you cannot just look at money to determine which one is from good source, which one is, might not be from good source. So it is very instructive for every financial institution, every business institution, to ensure that it has mechanisms in place to ensure that monies that come into their businesses are from legitimate sources. We wish to share with you also by way of background, and you know this, I'm just bringing some things back to the fore. You know that anti-money laundering is built on two pillars. There are two pillars, two fundamental pillars of this anti-money laundering effort. The first pillar is that you know the true identity of the customer. You must know who the customer is, not who the customer purports to be, who the customer is. And you only know that by checking, verifying the true identity of a person by way of a national identification document. So the first pillar is to verify the true identity of the customer. The next pillar, which is just as important, is verifying the source of that person's funds. And so, you know, to know who the person is, that's only half the battle. You also need to go a step further and to find out, verify that the funds are from legitimate sources. And so once you have those two in hand, you can verify the person, you know that the funds are legitimate, then you can go about determining whether the funds are legitimate or they are from illicit activity. And so those are the two pillars. When we talk about money laundering, we know that it can happen in so many different ways. And so what we need to do is to be mindful that whatever mechanism, whatever strategies a financial institution puts in place to mitigate or manage the risk of money laundering, that those mechanisms are strong enough and that they're versatile enough, they're flexible enough to take into account the many ways that people launder money. Now we know that there are no specific lists or methods by which people launder money. Every time, and certainly brother Mr. Colley from the FIU, he can share with us many stories that every time we find out what we call typologies, we study money laundering typologies, meaning we study the way somebody laundered money in the past. That's all the typology is. We look at the way they laundered money yesterday, last week, last year, 2 years ago. That's all that is. It's a typology. It shares with us the method they used in the past. But guess what? While we are reading those typologies, the criminals are also reading those typologies, which means that they know that we are aware of the way they did last year and last week. So they change their strategies. The point is, criminals are constantly changing the way they go about laundering money. So just as criminals are changing, the strategies to mitigate the risk of money laundering must be flexible enough too to adapt to those changes. And so money is laundered by so many means, and so we need to ensure that anti-money laundering programs are flexible enough to take into account all the nuances of the criminal minds. While we are asleep, good, law-abiding Christian citizens, when we go to sleep, the criminals are up devising new strategies. Anybody agree with me on that? They are up developing new strategies. You wouldn't believe what they came up with last night. They came up with some new stuff last night. And so that makes this business, this field of anti-money laundering so interesting. It is something that every time you think you have it down pat, you read something else and somebody comes up with something different. And that is why I'm a bit cautious and I become a little bit concerned when I hear people loosely using the term, such and such a person is an anti-money laundering expert. Don't get me wrong, I believe in credentials, I believe in persons participating in courses like this. However, we ought to be careful that when somebody is deemed to be an expert, that the suggestion is not that they know all about the subject matter. That is my point. Meaning that there's always something new to learn when it comes to the field of anti-money laundering / compliance. Very interesting field. How many of you are excited about anti-money laundering? Or your boss send you here and then you go pass the course and come back and bring your certificate. No, it's an interesting field. Well, I find it interesting. In fact, I can read typologies every day, all day, but not all day. But I just, it's so real to think that people out there are trying to infiltrate our formal financial system on a daily basis. That I find it very interesting. And the ways they go about doing that, I find that interesting. And that in some financial institutions know how to counter that. I find that interesting. I find also interesting that there are some financial institutions who do not have an interest in putting mechanisms in place, meaning that they do not understand or do not appreciate the importance of managing the risk of money laundering. Now, in that last point, I want to pull something else out of there. Everything that has to do with compliance / money laundering / anti-money laundering, all of that stuff, all of it is predicated on the subject matter of risk. Risk. That's going to be the key word, and you must keep that in the forefront of your mind as you go into this examination, as you finish off your assignments, your assignment, you need to continue to appreciate the importance of considering risk. How do we go about managing money laundering risk? You would agree with me that there is a risk, right? Money laundering poses a serious risk for financial institutions. On a daily basis, financial institutions, each financial institution in this country and globally is at a risk for somebody infiltrating their system, bringing monies into their system which were obtained from illicit sources. And so they need to put mechanisms in place to mitigate or try their best to manage those risks. And we know that risk, again, big subject matter, and I'm going to stay on it for another few seconds. Risk is so important, but it's not the frightening term some people make it out to be, because we take risks every day. You take risks when you come out your house, you take risks when you stay in your house, you take risks when you turn to certain corners, the risk that, you know, I'm going to house, a clear path, straight to work. Then as soon as you turn to the corner, you realize 50 other people were thinking the same thing. And every time you take the risk of saying, I'm going to take this shortcut this morning, some other persons were thinking the same thing. You know, some of you took a risk in engaging in this course. You take risks every day. You take a risk in sitting on the chair you were sitting in. You don't know who made that chair. You just plump yourself down with the expectation that the chair is going to hold you. That's a risk. Fortunately, it held up for everybody in here. But we take risks every day. Nothing wrong with risk. What we need to do, though, is as we go through life, we must ensure that the risks we take are manageable, that we're able to mitigate as many risks as possible and try to manage them as best as possible. I think last week, perhaps we would have gone through units 11 and 12, I think. Okay, for those who remember back that far, 11, what I want to share with you is for each of the units that I would have gone through, and I don't usually do this when it's done by somebody else, but I have a bit of what we call nuggets. Just a few pointers for those persons who you may want to have something to keep in your vehicle while you're stuck in traffic. It's something that you may want to read rather than keeping that big binder with you every day. You may want to just, just keep that with you. Something you may want to keep in the office. Something you may want to keep in the bedroom, under the bed. Don't let your family see it. But something, just a few salient points I pull out of the unit. We do that for each of the units that I share with you. And so that is for unit 11. You will very shortly be getting some for units 12 and 13. Let me say though that going forward today, what we're going to do is to look at unit 13. We're going to explore this whole business of compliance culture. We're going to talk about how to create an effective compliance culture. First of all, we will explore what culture is all about. We will also look at some of the barriers to developing a good culture within a financial institution. We will talk about the importance of staff awareness and training as it relates to culture. We will also look at this whole business of competency testing. How do you determine whether or not the staff within a financial institution had proper tests, had proper training? How do you go about determining whether the training was effective or not? And then what we will do is just do a quick summary of those points. We won't spend too much time here today. I'm going to spend the bulk of the time helping us look through the assignment and trying to prepare ourselves generally as we go on the whole. Look a little tense. Let me say to you that you are going to pass this course. I thought I would hear at least one. I vaguely heard something. I'm going to say it again. And maybe I get 2 amens this time. You are going to pass this course. 3. Anyway, we'll move along. We wouldn't stay there too long. Every group of persons, every society, anytime you find a group of persons coming together, living together, coming together for whatever cause it is, those persons end up what you may call developing or producing a culture. If you think of any group that you are in, that group has developed a culture over time. Think of certain churches. There are certain cultures within churches. Think of certain civic organizations. There's a culture within every civic organization. Think about every job that you've been on. There's a culture within every job. There's a culture in the workplace. There's a culture in every society. There's a Bahamian culture, meaning that you can point at something and say that there is unique to that group of people. Same thing within a financial institution. Let's transpose that into a financial institution. Every financial institution has a culture. Everyone has a culture. The culture of each organization is usually set by the leaders within that organization. Now, unfortunately, sometimes you have a culture which may emanate from the bottom and move up. That's not usually the case. Usually, the truism about a culture is that a culture emanates from the top and filters down throughout the organization. So we want to share with you that every organization has a culture. Think about it. When you walk into, and I don't want to call any particular institution's name, but when you walk into a particular bank, commercial bank on this island, there's a culture within that bank. When you walk in a certain institution, you recognize that people behave a certain way in those institutions. You walk in certain institutions and they're nice and quiet, and you wonder what's going on. Sometimes it seems so quiet you are scared to walk on the tiles because your heels are making too much noise. The place is just so quiet. It has such a quiet presence, such a quiet environment. Maybe that's their culture, that we want a very quiet atmosphere. You go into other institutions and as soon as you open up the door, it's almost like you open the door to Junkanoo or Carnival or something, because there's noise everywhere, lights flashing everywhere. That's the culture of that organization. That's only from the outside appearance. As you begin to engage people within a financial institution, you would find that cultures vary within institutions. Some institutions are very, what we call, risk averse, and you would have dealt with that term before, meaning that some companies, they suspect everybody that walks in the door. In their view, everybody that walks in is a criminal coming to do something, coming to try to infiltrate their system. And so you would find that those type companies, there's a culture where they determine that, you know what, we are just going to be so attuned to everybody that walks in here that we do not take any chances. We carry everybody through the ringer. Everybody that walks in here is suspect. You find other institutions where they're more liberal, and you'll find that when you start to engage them in transaction. Has anybody ever felt offended when you've been dealing with financial institutions for years, and every time you go back to the institution, they treat you like they never saw you before? Yeah. Every time you go in there, they ask you for your passport, your birth certificate, your grandmother's the documents. They treat you like, you know. But you would have thought that over time, after you would have built a rapport and relationship with them, that they will give you a little credit that, okay, at least they've seen you before, and that you do have a couple of dollars in here. That's culture. That's culture. How people operate within a financial institution speaks of the culture of that organization. So we say that every organization has a culture. Persons within the organization, whether they know it or not, usually end up adapting to the culture of their organization. Every person adapts to the culture of his or her organization. You know, many persons, you would know some persons who their demeanor, their personality was a particular way. And after they've been to a particular workplace, you find that they start to change. They start to look like the people. You know what I'm talking about? They start to act like the people, they dress like the people, they sound like the people. You know, particularly when it comes to things like private banking. Anybody in private banking? People in private banking, you know, sometimes you go to certain private banks and everybody sound alike. You go into some commercial banks and everybody sound alike. You know, it's like they have a particular lingo that they teach you. They have this thing, and this is too broad. This is not a good example. People talk about the culture of the public service. Now, I have a problem with that because it's difficult to make blanket statement about such a vast group of people. But you go into certain government offices, there are certain cultures in there, you know, and that may be good, and it's not all bad. My point is, every group of person, if they stay together long enough, they start to act like each other. And so you would find that people adapt to. Some persons who said they will never do some things, after they start to work a particular place, they find themselves doing it. I've known, and this is not a good example, but I've known some people who never touch alcoholic beverages, but just went into the hospitality industry innocently looking for a job, and next thing you know, they go to the far extreme and they end up becoming alcoholics, persons who never drank. Because, you know, I guess it becomes the social thing, you drink, or, you know, you just take a little, you know. It happens. It happens. So the point is, people usually adapt to the environment in which they're in. And so culture is a very serious thing. It's serious because culture determines whether or not the risk of money laundering is going to have success within a financial institution. Culture determines that, you know, we will not tolerate anybody laundering their money in this institution. That may be, it may not be written anywhere, but that might be the culture, that may be the persuasion of a financial institution, that we do not facilitate criminal activity. We do not assist criminals in laundering their money. So this whole business of culture is something that you want to keep in mind. Let's take it a step further and talk about the various types of culture. We want to say that the type or the quality of culture varies. We have some cultures, you know, within financial institutions which are very strong, which are such that criminals will find it difficult to launder their money, to further their criminal activities within financial institutions. And so the type of culture, the quality of the culture, whether or not it's good or bad, varies from one institution to the other. And so we want to share with you too that this whole business of culture and how it varies really determines whether or not the financial institution will have strong anti-money laundering programs. If you have, and remember now, we're talking about setting the tone at the top. If you have a board of directors who are attuned to, they have a full appreciation of the dangers of money laundering / terrorism financing, if that is known and accepted at the board level, and their view is that we do not want this to adversely affect our institution, you would find that they will put certain mechanisms in place, they will demand that certain things are put in place, which will lend to a strong anti-money laundering culture. Conversely, if you have a financial institution where the board of directors, senior management, they really are more concerned about the bottom line. Bring in the money at all costs, no matter what. Go after the high rollers, go after those with huge sums of monies, go after wealthy people, irrespective of the risks involved. We know that that is a culture. It will create a culture that, you know what, we have no regard in this institution for laws, regulation, and guidelines. We are more concerned about profitability. And we have seen that that has led many institutions down a very dark road. Your material speaks of what happened or what is still happening in the Mexican context. Anybody remember reading that? The billions of dollars which actually filtered and actually flowed from Mexico, the drug cartels and the like, those involved in marijuana, cocaine, all the other ills of society, how they got billions of dollars flowing from Mexico through the US. And so it begs the question, do we know where else those monies ended up? Did any come here? Did any go to Cayman? Did any go? Where did those monies go? The point is, anytime you have a culture which is lax, a culture which does not promote strong anti-money laundering programs, the risks are there that those institutions could be adversely affected by money launderers and those persons who have other criminal acts in mind. And so when we talk about creating an effective AML CFT culture, we ought to be concerned about some things. First of all, we ought to recognize that this whole business of culture, your material says that it is not written anywhere. You would hardly find a written document that says this is the culture of this institution. In fact, it speaks of culture as being something that is intangible. You can't put a finger on it and say, this is the culture of this bank, this is the culture of this insurance company, this is the culture of this law firm, accounting firm, real estate firm. You wouldn't see that, which means that somebody behind the scene is putting mechanisms in place, usually not even being conscious of it. They're setting the tone for how the institution operates, how the institution manages the risk of money laundering. And so it talks about the culture of a firm being, it's more than just a firm should do more than want to just be compliant. And that might be the culture of the organization. You may have some organization says, okay, this is what the law requires. We are going to do exactly what the central bank asks of us. We're going to do exactly what the Securities Commission asks of us, and beyond going a step further. We will do exactly what the Insurance Commission asks of us, and we wouldn't do one thing beyond that. And so maybe the culture of that organization might be, our aim is to just comply. Meaning that they will only be concerned with just in a very cursory way, looking at the FATF's 40 recommendation and say, okay, how do we comply with these recommendations? It's suggested in your material that institutions should want to do more than just comply. In fact, the culture of the organization is to set up an anti-money laundering program that is so strong that it even exceeds the bare minimum of the Financial Action Task Force's 40 recommendation. If you aim to satisfy the regulators, more than likely the program will not be as strong as it needs to be. And so the culture of the organization ought to be that we know what the central bank calls for. However, in the interest of the profitability and survival of this company, we'll go even further than that. Central bank says that we ought to have internal reviews and we ought to have training for staff at least once every year. We will do better than that. We will ensure that staff get training at least twice a year. Or that, in terms of this suspicious transactions reporting regime, the FIU calls for this, but we will go even further than that. And so you're talking about creating a culture that exceeds the bare minimum. If you shoot for the bare minimum, more than likely the institution will end up in trouble. We know certainly the financial fiasco and crisis of 2007, 2008 really speaks to poor cultures within organization. There, first of all, the commitment at the board level was not what it should have been. And obviously that permeated throughout those organizations such that risks were there that nobody was looking at. Nobody was concerned about the risk of money laundering, the risk of other criminal activities. Therefore, those institutions fell prey to criminal activity. And so the next thing we want to look at is this whole business of ethics. Somebody want to share with us what ethics? What is ethics? Somebody want to differentiate, let me just take it a step further. Somebody want to differentiate ethics from integrity. Your material speaks of them separately. It speaks of ethics, and ethics being something more general. Integrity speaks of as being a person's personal values. Nobody wants to answer? Or you say I answered already? I was hoping that somebody would put their hands up, but since nobody did, I figured I would just go on. The ethics, when you talk about ethics within an institution, that's very, very important. You're talking about the core values of an institution. You're talking about what an institution stands for. You're talking about, and so when you see ethics, you think of, okay, these are what we can look at as being the good qualities, hopefully good qualities of an institution. We're talking about what an institution values. Some institutions, as I said before, values the bottom line. And so they said, at any cost, we are going to move this business forward. We are going to generate as much revenue as possible and you know, forget about doing the right thing. Forget about putting mechanisms in place to determine whether somebody is a politically exposed person or not. It does not matter to us. It does not matter that a person has a criminal background. If they have enough money, that's okay. We want to do business with them. And so ethics, you're talking about the core values of an institution and whether or not that is attuned to something good. If a company has good ethical standards, you can say that more than likely they will be on the right track for having a good anti-money laundering program. The ethical standards of a financial institution they're very, very important. They say these are the things, this is as far as we go down this road. There's certain people that we do not want to do business with because you know, they're going to put us at unmanageable risk. They're bringing unmanageable risk to this institution. And so when you talk about ethical standards, again, ethical standards ought to come from the highest level within a financial institution. If you have unethical people at the board level, what do you think will happen eventually? What do you think will happen? If the board members, you have one or two directors who you know, criminally minded themselves.
You want me to call a name?
No, please do not.
No. Well, whatever is at the top, it flows down. So if you have unethical persons at the top, certainly there are going to be examples stemming from that organization showing a whole bunch of unethical conduct.
Thank you, Barry. Thank you very much. Appreciate that. About 2 years ago, when I was at the Compliance Commission in conducting seminars on anti-money laundering, I determined 1 year that for the entire year, our focus will be on boards of directors. Meaning that we are going to cater all of our training towards board members. Because I recognize that I'm going from one institution to another, which were regulated by the Compliance Commission at that time, I realized that those persons who showed the most interest in anti-money laundering was somewhere in the middle. Certainly, the people at the bottom, they didn't care. They said, well, I don't see any, why should I get the headache? They're paying those big fellas big bucks to let them look at it. And people at the board level were saying, oh, we're paying some people to look at that, so we don't have to. That people who were on the board of directors directors of the company weren't even aware of the anti-money laundering program of the institution for which they sat as board members. In fact, I also recognize that persons were happy enough to go into social gatherings and just say, you know, I'm on the board, I'm a director. It became a social thing. You know, you go to parties and, you know, when you're passing out your cards, you know, you're bragging that you, but they did not recognize the responsibilities that come with being a part of the board of directors, the directorate of the financial institution. And so it was determined that that whole year, all AML training would be geared towards the board of directors, just to ensure that the ethical standards are right at the top. Once it's right at the top, then more than likely it will permeate throughout the organization. The converse is also true.
Can you give examples of the type of institutions the Compliance Commission is regulated for?
The Compliance Commission regulates law firms, accounting firms, real estate brokers, certainly to a large extent, well, for years, credit unions. However, those have since moved to the central bank. Initially, let me step back and then I'll come forward. When the Compliance Commission first began, it regulated law firms, accounting firms, real estate brokers, financial and corporate service providers, credit unions, let's say real estate brokers, yes, and insurance companies. After the Insurance Commission was created, which came out of the old Registrar of Insurance, it took back the insurance companies from the Compliance Commission. So the Insurance Commission regulates insurance companies. So that, and then credit unions, as I said, went to the central bank. That leaves the Compliance Commission with law firms, accounting firms, real estate brokers.
Okay, just one last question. You have a routine policy of a schedule where you go into these firms?
Yes, certainly. And each financial institution is required by law to have an annual on-site examination. That was when the Compliance Commission first began. Because of the risk-based approach to anti-money laundering, which came into effect in 2004, the Compliance Commission schedules its on-site examination based on risk, which means that an institution that poses a high level of risk will have to submit annually. Those which pose a lesser level of risk may be put on a 2 or 3 year rotation.
So that all these can you say that all these organizations are captured by you? Because you have, for example, law firms popping up every day. Are they all risk-based? Do you have a mechanism to capture all these?
Okay, and I have to continue to say myself, them, you know,
Yes.
them.
Yes.
After saying us for 13 years. The laws in the Bahamas are unique when it comes to anti-money laundering. The Compliance Commission was put in a very difficult position whereby, and obviously the laws were rushed in 2000 when the Bahamas was blacklisted, such that when the Compliance Commission was created, what was put in the law in 3(1)K of the Financial Transactions Reporting Act, it stipulates when a lawyer, an attorney, becomes a financial institution. Meaning that there are 3 circumstances in which a lawyer becomes a financial institution. When a lawyer receives funds for the purpose of settling a real estate transaction, a lawyer receives funds for the purpose of depositing in his or her client's account, a lawyer receives funds for the purpose of investing on behalf of the client. Any of those 3 activities would give that lawyer a designation of financial institution. Meaning that, and it really was difficult, meaning that an attorney who just admitted to the bar, may put up his or her sign and provide those services, that attorney, an individual, is deemed to be a financial institution just as an RBC for his Caribbean. Same designation, meaning that they have the same obligations under the law to submit the on-site examination, KYC, suspicious transactions, the whole gamut. So the Compliance Commission, you're right, there are many law firms out there, but the Compliance Commission is only concerned with them when they provide any of those 3 specific services.
That's my point. There are many out there who are captured in those 3 points, and I'm not aware of them being under the purview of the compliance. I mean, by law they are, but I'm not aware of any actual physical activity by the Compliance Commission with
Mhm.
respect to some of those firms.
Yeah, well, there is a schedule of on-site examination. Another thing too is that because there's no mandatory requirement for them to register or to be licensed with the Compliance Commission, we know that all banks must be licensed with Central Bank. All insurance companies must be licensed by the Insurance Commission. Persons who fall under the Compliance Commission are only required to register with the Compliance Commission. And a lot of times that is done in a way where the law firm is expected to register with the Compliance Commission. So the Compliance Commission will give an example, and you take me back into my former life. The Compliance Commission would get a list from the Bar Association every year. Not only that, throughout the year, they would get a list of all of the new callees. And as soon as they get that list, they would send out registration packages to each of those persons, telling them of their obligation to register and to submit to the AML program.
So you would agree there's a fall down, especially just in that step right there?
That is, it poses a problem. It poses a challenge. I think the Compliance Commission has been fairly successful in going after law firms, but because, and it's an ongoing process, it's never a point where the Compliance Commission can ever say to you, this is the complement of our constituents. Never, ever.
Sorry,
because it's ongoing.
You said there is no obligation on that law firm to fall in the category 2, in fact, report or to register with the Compliance Commission?
There is an obligation on their part, but not like a licensing obligation. The law says that anytime they're providing those services, they should register, but it puts them under the AML regime. Obviously, with the Compliance Commission being the regulator for them, it puts them under that regulatory regime, meaning that they should submit to and comply with everything that's required by that regulatory body.
So they have an obligation as well?
Certainly, yes. So again, the culture of the law firm might be, unless the regulator comes after us, unless we aren't going after them, they need to come to us. That might be the culture of an organization. So again, you see what happens with this whole business of culture and the ethics, the ethical standards of the principles within a law firm or an accounting firm.
Well, I think also maybe consider the culture of the law firms is that they, because they're lawyers, because they have lawyer-client privilege, they should not be subjected to submitting to this, that, and the other. And I'm told that there's a case in Canada that just was ruled on that speaks about this as well. So that's a culture that they've followed for many decades.
Certainly.
Breaking that is the thing, and I suspect being able to sanction some of them or more of them, and maybe some charges. Maybe that may be the answer.
Certainly. And speaking of the lawyer-client privilege, which lawyers always like to throw out the Compliance Commission, we shouldn't even register with you because of the lawyer-client privilege. That does not stand in law. In fact, Section 17 of the Financial Transactions Reporting Act does allow for lawyer-client privileges. However, it also says there's a proviso in there that says anytime you're providing financial intermediary services, the lawyer-client privileges fall away. Meaning that the Compliance Commission in the Bahamas respects lawyer-client privilege, but not when you're providing financial intermediary services. So, we fought with lawyers on that all the time. So that's ethics, and ethics should be at the board level and then filtrate throughout the organization. Then it also begs this whole issue of integrity. If you have people within an institution who lack integrity, that's also a challenge for a financial institution. That's also a challenge, meaning that if you have people who do not have good moral standings, those people are susceptible to doing anything. And let me share something with you. I've recognized over the years that somehow criminals can sniff out, they can find people who do not have integrity. They can find somebody who will be complicit with them in furthering their cause. Do you know that criminals walk into financial institutions? Let me give you a weird scenario. They would walk into a financial institution and they can recognize those persons who just reached, and they try to abuse that, that those persons may not know all that they need to know. Criminals also can somehow get information on those persons who are just barely getting by, and they would try to befriend those persons. It happens. Criminals know those persons, and think about some of your colleagues, maybe not your colleagues, but there are some people in workplaces where every time the phone rings, they jump because they think that might be a predator, or you have known of co-workers who duck calls, they don't accept calls, they don't want anybody, or sometimes letters may come to their workplaces, final notice. All kinds of things going on, and if you know them closely enough, you will know that they're having some financial challenges. My point is, criminals also find out when people are having financial challenges, and they attempt to befriend those people. And those people will be their leeway into the financial institutions if they're not careful. And so this whole business of integrity is very, very important. If you have somebody within your institution who does not have integrity, who does not have good moral standards, good moral beliefs, criminals will have a feast. They will just love to befriend people like that. Because remember now, the criminals love to have people on the inside of the institution who will be complicit with what they're trying to accomplish. And so it's very important for everyone in an institution to have integrity. Very, very important. Any questions or concerns there so far? Let's go to this next step. You talk about compliance and this whole business of culture and the like. It is very important to recognize too that culture is very important when a country is developing its anti-money laundering program. You have certain cultures. Think about the Mexican culture. Think about how difficult it would be if you were trying to develop an AML program in Mexico. I say Mexico because Mexico falls within almost every AML book. A lot of AML money laundering typologies speaks of the Mexican drug cartel. Think about institutions within countries which are known for criminal activity, be it terrorism financing or money laundering. Think of how difficult it is to set up an AML program in those countries. And so we can see that this whole business of culture can really be a barrier to really setting up an AML program. And so what are some of the barriers to having an effective AML program? Certainly what we need to recognize is that each organization is constrained by people who are in there who may not want a good AML program. So you will find that people within the institution do not lend themselves to furthering a good, strong AML culture. Let us step back a second. It is very important for every financial institution to have a strong AML CFT culture. Very, very important. But if you look at some of the barriers to that, you will find that there are many and varied. If you're talking about, again, some of the barriers to creating a good, strong financial culture, financial AML program that speaks to a strong culture, you may find that people at lower levels, you have to be so careful with people at lower level or new employees. A lot of them have the view that it's a management thing, that I don't have to be concerned about suspicious transactions reporting or suspicion in general. That's the MLRO's responsibility. You know, many people know of things that are happening within their respective institution, but their view is that that's the MLRO job. That's the compliance officer's job. That's not my responsibility. And so their view is that I don't need to be concerned about those things. I don't need to be concerned about the AML program because the MLRO will catch it. The compliance officer will catch it. They don't pay me for that. That's not my area. And so you have a whole situation where persons within an institution do not buy into the compliance culture. They do not buy into the AML program because their view is that that belongs to somebody else. Either it belongs to senior management or it belongs to the compliance people. Do you know that within financial institutions there are barriers, there are brick walls, there are Chinese walls, there are all sorts of things going on right within financial institutions. Within an institution, you can have a situation where somebody is aware of criminality taking place, but their view is that our department don't deal with that. That's not our area. Can you hear somebody saying that? That ain't our area, we don't deal with that. They deal with that on the other floor or that other department, but they don't even know what they call them other people. Yeah, that's John and those, or John and those. We don't deal with that here. And so a good compliance culture requires buy-in from all staff members. Everybody ought to be on board. Everybody ought to be a part of it. Remember, the person who, you only need one individual in a financial institution to bring down the whole institution. And criminals can sniff out the weakest link, and that's who they go after. That one person who may not even be in the compliance area can bring down the financial institution. And so there are several barriers that we ought to be concerned about. In your book, I see there are certain statements in there, and usually from lower level staff. The first one I see says, well, my suspicion doesn't count. It doesn't matter if I'm suspicious about anything. Nobody cares anyway. In fact, first of all, nobody ever asks me. They don't ask me what I think. The next one says, you have management pressure to transact business. Management say, go after the dollar. That ain't what we're paying you for. We don't even want to hear your opinion on that. Serve the customer. Go and get the money. Next one says, compliance is not my responsibility. I don't work in the compliance area. That's those other people. That's that other department. So compliance is not our business. And then you have territorial attitudes towards key customers. Some people say, look here, particularly in private banking, we can see this so clearly where you have your relationship managers. And somebody may say, look here, this my customer. I don't care what you think about this customer. This is my customer. And so they become territorial. They become personal. They say, look here, let me manage this. I'm managing this relationship. I don't care what you think about it. I don't care what suspicions you have about my customer. This is my customer, and I will continue this relationship, even to the detriment of the institution. And then you have lack of senior management buy-in. Again, big problem. If you do not have senior management buying into the culture, buying into the AML program, that poses a serious problem from many, many perspectives. One of them is that when senior management buys into the AML program, they will approve your training budget. They will approve anything if you need further material, if you need AML software, whatever you need to further the AML program. If senior management is on board, you have half the battle won. Conversely, if senior management has not bought into the program and they are penny pinching senior managers or they are just profit driven, that poses a serious problem. Because we know that within every financial institution, in fact within every organization that ever had a training program, anytime an organization is seeking to cut costs, what is usually the first thing they go after? Training. Training is usually the first thing that they go after. Okay, no, we need to cut the training budget. We didn't do as well as we wanted to do last year, so this year we're going to cut the training budget. training budget, if staff are not properly trained, they can end up committing some regulatory breach and end up spending in regulatory fines much more than they saved in cutting the training budget. Anybody agrees with that? Anybody knows any situation like that? Don't put up your hand, let's move on. And so you need to have buy-in to the training program, buy-in to the AML program at all levels. Why are you doing that? It's scared of you if you do that to yourself, just stay right over there. Okay? And so the next point we want to go to is this whole business of the money laundering reporting officer. What can the money laundering reporting officer do? We know that they have a heavy responsibility, and imagine the nightmare that it can be for a money laundering reporting officer trying to do his or her job and not having the support of the board of directors or senior management. That has to be a difficult job to get up to every morning and to go into the workplace knowing what you know, knowing the risks involved in your institution, and not having the support of senior management or the board of directors. Very, very critical. That has to be one of the most challenging situations to be in. If you're the MLRO and you have to fight for the training budget, you have to fight to get your STRs, even though you ought to have free flow from the institution to the FIU or institution to the police. But then senior management wants to see every STR. Do you know that there's some institutions around here, their senior management still says, that STR does not leave this place unless we see it. When the MLRO ought to have direct route straight into the FIU. But again too, when you look at the constraints of having, building a good compliance culture, the MLRO can be at a grave disadvantage if they do not have the support of senior management. But I'm sure you would have remembered all the MLRO's tasks from Unit 11. What you want to do is to refresh that and look again at all that is required of the MLRO. And so we go next to this business of staff training, staff awareness. Staff, everybody, every individual on a daily basis act based on their body of information, their experiences, information that would have come their way by way of training or just life experiences. And that's what is panned out on a daily basis. And so when you look at this whole business of training, it says that every staff member of a financial institution ought to receive training on an ongoing basis. Lack of training has brought down many companies. Because if you have financial institutions where people simply do not know, are not exposed to AML programs, AML obligations, they put those institutions at risk. And so we know that training is very, very important. Let us look next at the modes of training, the types, the methods by which training occurs. We know that within financial institutions, some of them are more traditional, where you go in a classroom setting, or you go to the hotel, or you go to a particular place where there's an AML training. That is one mode, that is one method of training. There are so many others. Nowadays, you can purchase AML CFT DVDs, and you can have online training, you can have virtual, you can just do so many things when it comes to the ways in which training occurs. And so, however a financial institution chooses to conduct its training, you have to be mindful and keep in your body of information that training can occur in many, many ways. The way in which training occurs is not nearly as important as the quality of the training. The training must be high quality. What does the training program entail? In fact, you ought to have sign off by senior management of the content of the training program. You ought not just be satisfied to say, okay, every staff member went to training last year. And then nobody knows what the training material covered. Nobody was even concerned that the training was of poor quality, or the training, how often do you think financial institutions, let me just ask you a general question. Do you think financial institutions are concerned that the training program is adapted, effective? That's one thing, but also that it is tailor-made to that institution. Sometimes I've been to training programs where the training was so generic and general and hairy-fairy, it spoke to nothing in particular. Somebody just stood up and just went on and on and on and on about, and just, using generalities, like, they talk about the 3 stages of money laundering. Or, just talk about suspicious transactions in general. I feel as though every institution ought to make a strong effort. If you're in the insurance sector, you have to ensure that the training that is given to that institution speaks of what occurs in the insurance sector. And how do you go about building an effective AML program with insurance? It ought to take into account typologies from the insurance sector. It does not make sense for somebody to go to, who works in insurance, to go to an AML program or AML training course, and all they're talking about is scenarios in the banking sector, how people launder money through banks. Now we know that, first, when this AML thing began, most of the emphasis was on bank, and rightfully so. However, we have now moved where the criminals have moved away from the banks, and they're now in the insurance companies, they're now in the law firms, they're now in the real estate firm. When are we going to get the message that criminals are buying properties every day from some real estate broker somewhere in the world, hopefully not in the Bahamas, but criminals, they found that real estate is a good asset to put dirty money into. And so somebody working in the real estate sector, they would not benefit, they would not profit from going to an AML training program that only gives banking scenarios. And so my point is, whatever institution you're in, the training ought to be tailored for that institution. Any questions or concerns there? I know all of you have been to training programs before, right? AML training. Everybody said yes, besides one. Our training records maintained. Not only should there be a need for everyone in a financial institution to be trained, there ought to be a requirement for training records to be held by that institution, whereby the regulators ought to be able to come in there and verify that everyone has been trained. Meaning that persons who attend training programs ought to be made, if you're going abroad, it ought to be a requirement for you to bring back the certificate and the material, not just the certificate, and the material. If it happens in-house, every staff member ought to be made to sign a register. And then the timing and frequency, that varies from one company to another. But you ought to ensure that whatever the frequency is of the AML training, that it is adequate for the institution. We see that, and you will see in your material, Jersey has certain requirements when it comes to training. We see the UK has certain obligations when it comes to the frequency of training. In the Bahamian context, it is, correct me if I'm wrong, Brother Corley, I think it's Section 5 of the Financial Intelligence Transactions Reporting Regulation that speaks to training at least once per year for all employees, all staff of a financial institution. Do we take that into account? No. A lot of times in institutions we find that management goes off to these training. I mean, management goes off to the training, they come back, if they bring the folder back, the folder goes on their shelf or in their desk drawer and they lock it away somewhere. The information is not shared. And so all these things are very, very important when it comes to training. is training maintained at a high level? You know, again too, the training must be appropriate for the institution, and it must be something that is brought in from the highest level within the institution. And then after staff have been trained on the AML programs, either locally or globally, wherever they're trained, who goes back and determine whether or not the training was effective, as you mentioned? It does not make sense to spend the resources of a financial institution training people, quote unquote, and then persons, nobody got the message, nobody understood anything, or in practical terms, the training was not effective at all. And so somebody needs to come back at some point and test whether or not the training was effective. I remember when I was at that other place, I did a training program, and then near to the end of the training program, I stopped the presentation and I took out some test papers for the persons. And if you see how those people looked at me, they were shocked. First of all, they said they weren't ready for a test. You know, and they didn't think they should have a test. So, to save face, I left the test with the institution and asked them to administer it. That's been years ago. I'm not sure if they ever administered the test. But the point is, at some point, somebody ought to test whether or not the training material has been imparted properly, and whether or not persons received it properly, whether or not they understood the material. And so it speaks of doing random tests. Persons, and I truly believe that anytime somebody participates, particularly if you have training in-house, staff members ought to be tested on the material to determine, first of all, to determine whether they understood it, and obviously the training program may have to be tweaked, may have to be adjusted based on the outcome of those of the test. Who looks at the results? What happened with the results? Suppose the result determined that nobody understood a particular subject matter which was covered in the training program. Do they adjust the training program? Or they just say, well, this group didn't get it, maybe the next one will get it next year. What do they do with the results? What about critical people who work in the AML CFP area? What about the MLRO? What about the compliance officer and the persons who work with those persons? You think there ought to be a higher standard for somebody who works in the compliance area. The institution should want to know that those persons understand the material. Are persons reassigned? We don't talk about terminating people. Are persons reassigned if you realize through the test that, you know what, this person really does not have the capacity for this area? Some people do not have competencies for compliance, and so they may do very well as, you know, a person in the customer service area, or maybe the back end or something. But you have to be very careful that the persons who are chosen to work in the compliance function are suitable for that area. What we're going to do, as I mentioned earlier, I want us to spend some time looking at the assignment. Before I do that, let me just say, by way of summary, you have to be very, very cognizant of the fact that every institution needs to have a strong culture of compliance, meaning that that culture of compliance should be at the very senior level, preferably in cases where there is a board of directors, that the culture emanates from the board of directors, and that it not only emanates from the board of directors, it is filtered throughout the organization, such that everybody within the organization, first of all, understands the culture and buys into the culture. We're talking about setting the tone at the top. The board of directors sets the tone at the top. And so if you have a strong tone at the top when it comes to AML CFT, the institution is less likely to fall into problems when it comes to managing the risk of money laundering, the risk of terrorism financing. And so culture is very, very important. The ethical standards at the board level, very, very important. it is critical that you have people at the board level who promote high ethical standards within the institution. In fact, institutions ought to have, even though it might not be written, they ought to have as their motto or standards or whatever that we demand high ethical standards in this institution. Then we take that and drop down a bit and speak of integrity, the importance of integrity. Everybody within the institution ought to have integrity. Obviously, starting from the most senior level. We know that you have persons at the senior level who lack integrity. Obviously, the institution is going down a dark road that would not end well. And so integrity is very important. It's very important for institutions to have a strong anti-money laundering, combating the financing of terrorism training program. Training and awareness. Training might be a one-off thing. Training may be something where you just sit everybody down for an hour and a half and you go to the whole AML CFT regime. Awareness is something that is ongoing. There's an obligation, particularly of the MLRO, to ensure that staff are fully aware of the AML CFT program and that everybody is moving in the same direction. So training is critical. We said that once persons are trained, there ought to be records of whatever method they use. There ought to be a record of those persons who were trained, and those persons ought to be tested at some point in time. There ought to be an assessment of the effectiveness of the training program. Once it is deemed that the program is effective, that's all well and good. If it has been determined that the training was not as effective as it should have been for whatever reason, the training program ought to be adjusted accordingly. The aim is to ensure that training programs are effective. And so therein lies some of the salient points out of Unit 13. Any questions or concerns at this time? Just one at a time, you don't have to put up your hand. What I wish for us to do next, how many of you have the assignment? I think it's assignment 2. How many of you have that with you? Everyone has it? If you do not, I have copies of it right here. So, there were going to be about 25 to 30 people here. I just see others. The others are still on their way, right?
Still recuperating.
Still recuperating. Moving right along. What I want us to do is, and certainly, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, and if there are no further adjustments, I think we have a review on June 13th. What I want us to do in the interim is to ensure that we have you as prepared as possible for the final exam. What I want to share with you in the interim is how do you go about approaching the assignment. And so let us look, does everybody have a sheet I call considerations for assignment 2? Let us look at that, please. And let me share with you, I know that you're all brilliant. Each of you is brilliant. And so I don't mean to offend you. I'm just sending something that you may find useful. If you don't find it useful, you can just set it aside somewhere. But I think it might be useful for you. Some voices I haven't heard yet today. Why does everybody hold down their head when I say things like that? Okay, let's do this. The paper that says consideration for assignment 2. I'm saying that the information is for your consideration when completing the assignment. If you have any questions or concerns as we go along, feel free to stop me. I want to say, first of all, start off by saying the key to quality results is mastering what I call the 2 C words, content and context. That binder that you have, that body of information that you have, there's only so much material contained in that binder. That is, you have information contained in there. I would call that the content of your folder. And then there's other C word, context. The material, as I said, there is some repetition, but even though some of the terms, some of the issues are repeated, it comes from a different context. And so once you look at the material, once you look at the content, you ought to be mindful also of the context in which the material comes. And so the key to you either finishing a good assignment or finishing the examination strongly is to keep in mind content and context. I'll explain that a little later on. Pay close attention to the information provided and be guided by it. Look for a central lead question. Read the questions carefully. Read the questions carefully and completely and answer the questions. You have to be so careful, and this may sound trite. I've seen, I'm aware of persons who went to town, pages upon pages, and answered the wrong question. If you're not careful, that can happen. If you do not read the question properly, that can happen. If you do not read all questions, you can find that you answered parts of the question and missed parts of it. And so I want to say to you, read all the questions properly and answer all of the questions. As basic and elementary as that sounds, you may want to keep that in mind. The next thing I want to share with you is when you look at a question, and we're going to develop these points. When you look at the question, each question has a central point, a central theme, somewhere they want to take you. Every question. And usually you may find within a question there's a central theme, and then there are other underlying themes. You may call one primary theme, and there may be secondary or offshoots from that primary theme. We'll talk about that also. Ensure that the questions are answered thoroughly and clearly. Remember, when you're writing your assignment, when you are completing the final examination, you are trying to convince somebody on the other side of the world that you understand the subject matter. They don't know you, you don't know them. More than likely, you two never communicated. You're going to have an examiner who will be sitting down assessing your answers, and you have to be able to convey to them that you understood the material. That is what I mean when I say answer the questions thoroughly and concisely. Do not assume that these people understand what you mean. First of all, a lot of those persons who are answering the questions do not understand financial services in the Bahamian context. They do not. And so you need to give them the material in such a way where it is concise and clear enough to demonstrate that you understand content and context. You understand the AML material that was provided for you. I see some of you looking puzzled. We're coming back to these points. Let us look at some considerations for some questions that you ought to be asking yourself. We're going to look at the assignment in a couple of seconds. First thing you ought to do when you're looking at an assignment, everybody has the assignment handy? When you're looking at the assignment, the first thing you ought to ask yourself is, who am I? What part do I play? From what perspective am I addressing this assignment? Who am I? We're going to come to that in a little while. We'll see who you are. But these are some of the questions that you ought to be asking yourself, because questions are worded in such a way that you have to be careful that you are answering from the perspective that they ask you. If they say that you are the money laundering reporting officer, you cannot write an answer from the standpoint of if you were a board member. You are the MLRO, so you write from the standpoint of the MLRO. The next question is, what type of financial institution is involved here? Has it been given, or they give me the latitude to say an institution of your choice? If sometimes they're more specific than that and they give you a sector, they give you a type of financial institution. Be very careful that you are tailoring your question, you are answering the question in such a way that you are addressing the type of sector, the type of institution, if given, or if you choose one, stick to the one that you're given. The next question is, what is the issue? Every question is drawn or geared towards addressing a particular issue or problem. Every question, it's going to identify some problem, some weakness, something that's going on, some issue. So when you look at the assignment, you're going to ask yourself, what is the issue here? What is the question? Where do they want to take me here? What is the problem? What is the challenge here? And you want to be very careful with that. The next question is, what concepts in your material, what concepts in the binder can I draw on to answer this question properly? Remember too now, you have a whole body of information, all of these units. Never confine yourself to just one or even two or just a few of the units. Whatever the issue is, in developing your response to that issue, use the entire body of information that is given to you. In addition to that, you will be given credit for any other information that is relevant that you can bring into play. Let me suggest something to you right up front. Anytime you're answering a question on whether it's an assignment or doing your final exam, the more you can draw on this here, the better you will be. Meaning that if you cite examples or relate a subject matter to a particular recommendation of the Financial Action Task Force, you will catch the attention of the assessor. And so when appropriate, always draw on the 40 recommendation. If you're dealing with something that speaks to politically exposed person, draw on the recommendation. Say the recommendation 12 requires that if you're dealing with a politically exposed person, these are the requirements. You have to employ enhanced due diligence when you're dealing with a politically exposed person. My point is, draw on this as much as possible. If you're dealing with something that speaks to a CDD matter, speak of the requirements of recommendation 10. Let them know that you know that recommendation 10 speaks to customer due diligence. If it has to do with record keeping, make reference to recommendation 11. The Financial Action Task Force in recommendation 11 requires that records are maintained for a period of 5 years or whatever. Speak to this here. Always draw reference to the Financial Action Task Force. You will intrigue and you will definitely persuade the assessors that you understand the subject matter in a global context. Don't just talk about the FTRA. FTRA, you make reference to that, but that's local and that will help you, but don't just confine yourself to the local context. Try your best to draw on global obligations. The next one is, how do I present the information that I have access to in a clear and constructive manner? Drawing on the material. First of all, accessing the material, we're talking about content. All the information that I have, how do I go about explaining it in a concise manner? You're talking about the context, concept, sorry. To avoid direct extraction from the material. Don't go into the book and pull out a whole paragraph and so you just drop it into your answer. Meaning that as much as is possible, transpose the information into your own words. Use your own words so that you can understand the concepts that are in the book, not just that you extracted it because you say something says suspicious transactions and then you go and follow that. I know nobody would do that. I just thought I would remind you of the importance of putting things into your own words. Another thing is, after getting the material that you want, how do you build on it? Remember we said that when they pose a question to you by way of assignment or a final question, they're asking you to build a story. Let's liken that onto building a house. The foundation says this is the problem, and so you start from the root of it. You start to put down a good foundation, and you build, drawing into these other concepts. Ask yourself the question: if you were receiving, after responding to the assignment, but if you're receiving that from somebody else, would you understand what it is that they're saying to you? How clear is it? How would you assess the question and the response that they gave you? The next thing is, ask yourself, personalize the assignment. Personalize the final exam question. Let's stick to the assignment. Personalize the assignment. If my livelihood, my very being depended on how somebody assess my response, but I keep my job. Suppose they tell me that your job depends on how well you respond to this question. Can I keep my job, or would they tell me, no, you don't cut it, we'll see you later on. And then the final question is, have you done your best with the assignment? Let us look at the assignment. I have 18 points that I wish to share with you. I know your hands are tired now. You may not want to write them. You may want to just listen. 18 points that I have drawn out of this assignment question. 18 points. And I stress 18 several times because I want you to appreciate that if you're not careful, when you read a question, when you read an assignment, you can miss so many critical things if you do not do so properly. So let us look at the question. First of all, do I have a volunteer to read this question? Why are you looking at everybody? You want to read it? Read it for us, please. Thank you very much in advance.
You are a newly appointed MLRO in a medium-sized regulated firm in a sector and jurisdiction of your choice. Following a recent regulatory visit, which focused on AML CTF issues, the regulator identified a number of adverse findings around the AML CTF systems and controls. The regulatory report was considered by the risk committee of the firm, who were being appraised of the firm's AML CTF failings for the first time. The risk committee was rightly concerned by the issues raised and escalated the issues to the board. The board is keen to avoid any negative publicity or impact arising from the regulatory findings, and has asked you as the MLRO and as someone who will come into the firm with fresh ideas and focus to conduct a complete review of the AML CTF infrastructure within the firm, together with the mandate to put in place recommendations for change with an implementation plan that will attract regulatory approval. Assume the regulatory report has been critical of the firm under a number of headings as contained below. Using best practice guidelines, what should the firm look like in respect of those highlighted areas below if it were to be classified as complying with best practice? Governance and culture, AML CTF systems and controls, AML CTF resourcing, due diligence procedures. A brief overview will suffice. The adoption of a risk-based approach, monitoring systems, record keeping, AML CTF training, SAR reporting systems. Draft a briefing paper for the board of directors that will demonstrate what good looks like in these areas and prepare a roadmap of how change could be implemented.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that. These are the 18 points that I pulled out of this question. You may want to jot them. If you're jotting them, I will speak a little more slowly, but if you wish, I can just read them off. The first point is you are a newly appointed MLRO. That speaks of your position, and it also speaks of your tenure. You are a newly appointed MLRO. That's the first point. One of the things that come to mind when you talk about a newly appointed MLRO, the first thing that comes to mind is the role of the money laundering reporting officer. You have plenty material in your, plenty information, plenty content that speaks to the role of the money laundering reporting officer. So that's the first thing that ought to jump out at you. Being the MLRO, the first thing you have to think about, the role of the money laundering reporting officer. You can go to town on just that point alone. Because once you're the MLRO, you have the authority to build some things, put some things in place. We're going to develop that as we go along. That's the first point, that you are the newly appointed MLRO. The second point is it is a medium-sized firm. Medium-sized firm. That's also important from the standpoint, I'll just give you the point and then I'll make a few comments about it. That's also critical because that steers you in a direction that you need to think about a medium-sized firm. Now, medium in the Bahamian context is different from medium, in the UK context is different from a medium in the US context. But you can determine what medium is. And you can take it from the standpoint that there are certain peculiarities when you're talking about a medium-sized firm. Small firms have certain challenges that are inherent with small firms. They don't have the resources to do something, they do. Big firms have a problem when you have too many staff members. How do you create a training program that's suited? How do you ensure buy-in from within a large firm? Sometimes firms are so large that the size of the firm can pose a problem. You right there in the middle, you're dealing with a medium-sized firm. That's the second point. The third point is they give you the latitude to select the firm. And they said, sector of your choice. That suggests to me that when I am given a question, say, sector of my choice, I have the latitude to choose whatever sector I wish. If I want to choose insurance, I choose insurance. I want to choose banking, I want to choose real estate, I want to choose law. Whatever I want to choose, I can choose. Let me hasten to suggest to you, whatever sector you choose, make sure you have enough information to respond to the question. Do not start to go down the road and then you find out that, you know what, this sector, I'm not comfortable enough with this to fully develop this. You're building a whole house. You want to get to the windows and find out, you know, okay, we run into some problems here. I can't find any more information in the book, or there are no typologies for this sector. So that you have the liberty to choose the sector is a good thing. The next point is, it says the jurisdiction of your choice. Another positive. That you can choose the jurisdiction that you want to explore is a good thing. You may want to do it in the Bahamian context based on the house you are building, based on the story you are building. You may want to go for a jurisdiction that has serious money laundering vulnerabilities. Because if you're building a story that you need to put some things in place from the ground up, it might be beneficial to you to look in the context of a jurisdiction that is known for criminal activity. You see the point there? If you're talking about a jurisdiction that is known for high AML CFT standards, if you choose that, all you have to do is continue to build on the fact that whatever the strengths are of that AML CFT program of that jurisdiction. So that you are able to choose the jurisdiction is another positive thing. Make sure though that the jurisdiction that you choose, you are able to fully develop it. The next point is, it says the firm was recently visited by regulators for AML CFT issues. That means that this firm just came out of an on-site inspection. That is critical. The firm was recently visited by the regulators. That means that an on-site inspection took place recently, and the on-site dealt with AML CFT issues. The next point is, am I going too fast? Yeah. Everybody okay? The next point is, the regulators identified weaknesses in the AML CFT systems and control. The regulators identified weaknesses in the AML CFT systems and control. That's a critical point. And that can lead you down a long road where you can pick up so many things, because even though they gave you some examples, they gave you a list, the fact that the regulators identify these concerns, you can develop that in a strong way. Another point is that there is a risk committee. Do not overlook that. That this institution has a risk committee is another strong point. That says something about that institution, that they went so far as to put in place a risk committee. We know that many institutions, in fact, I think the vast majority of institutions we would be familiar with do not have such a thing. But this institution has a risk committee, so that's another positive. The next point is, the risk committee is concerned by the regulator's report. Sorry, that the risk committee receives the regulatory report, sorry. The next point will obviously be that they are concerned about it. The risk committee receives the regulator's report. The risk committee is concerned about the findings of the report. The next point is that the regulatory issues were escalated to the board. That's another strong point. While you're writing, let me share with you why that is a strong point. You know, there's a whole unit that speaks on the escalation process. And so we know that it is a very important thing for an institution to have an escalation process. How does an institution go about bringing to the attention of somebody senior when there are regulatory concerns, when there are breaches? Is that information escalated? Does it go to higher levels within the institution? So the fact that the regulatory issues were escalated to the board is a very important point. The next point is, the board wants to avoid negative publicity. The board wants to avoid negative publicity. Another important point. Not only is the board been made aware of the regulatory weaknesses, the board is interested enough to say, we do not want it to fall out of any negative publicity. that the board is saying that is very important. We know that sometimes things are brought to the attention of the board and they set it aside or they're not concerned about it. So it's important that this board is interested. The next point is you are asked to conduct, and be fine-tuning it, you are asked to conduct a complete review of the AML CFT infrastructure. You are asked to conduct a complete review of the AML CFT structure. The next point is you are asked to recommend changes. This is perhaps one of the most positive points in here. You are asked to recommend changes. Meaning that you could go to town on saying what ought to be put in place, what should be, what remedial actions can your institution put in place to eradicate, to address the concerns of the regulators. So you are invited, you are asked to recommend changes. The next point is you are asked to develop an implementation plan. You are asked to develop an implementation plan. That means not only do they ask you to recommend how they go about addressing the regulatory concerns, you are also invited to put an implementation plan in place. That's another positive. So you can say to them, this is what we ought to implement to address and to ensure that these regulatory breaches do not reoccur. The next point is you have been given 9 assumed weaknesses. You've been given 9 assumed weaknesses, which means that you have 9 specific subject matters that you can develop. 9. The next point is you are able to use best practices. When we talk about best practices, we can talk about that from a global perspective. You can use best practices, guidelines to address the weaknesses identified. You can use best practices, guidelines to address the weaknesses identified. Another part to that same point, is you can also propose what the firm should look like afterwards. You can also propose what the firm should look like afterwards. The next point is you are asked to draft a briefing paper for the board of directors. You are asked to draft a briefing paper for the board of directors for a good system, good in inverted commas. You are asked to draft a briefing paper to the board of directors. That's also critical because if you have an opportunity, as is the case here, to write to the board of directors, you're sending your concerns, you're sending your recommendations to the highest level within the institution. The final point is you are asked to prepare a roadmap for implementing the changes. You are asked to prepare a roadmap for implementing the changes. let me ask this in a very general sense. How many of you, in reading the assignment, pulled out all of those points? By show of hands, all of you, right? Some of them? Okay. Once again, when you are answering this assignment question, make sure you make full use of all material. What you would want to do, let us look at the 9 identified weaknesses. First of all, let's step back to the point of you being the MLRO. I mentioned before, let me say again, the fact that you have been identified as the money laundering reporting officer, the first thing you would do is to put yourself in the role of the money laundering reporting officer. What is the role of the money laundering reporting officer? What are the responsibilities of the money laundering reporting officer? What are the powers or authority of the money laundering reporting officer? Start to think along that line. And you can build, don't think of it in a negative light where we know that some MLROs are constrained within the institution. Use it from the most broad perspective you can. That you are the money laundering reporting officer, that's one point. That you are new, you're the new kid on the block. Let us consider that this institution, obviously, it perhaps was no secret that the regulators were able to identify some material weaknesses. And you can even think outside the box so far that you can say that having been brought in to strengthen the AML program of this company, that's why they brought you in. That's why they're paying you the big bucks. That's why you're the newly appointed, you're the new kid on the block. They're bringing you in because perhaps they weren't, can you envisage that perhaps they weren't pleased with the last assessment they got from the regulators? And perhaps they say, you know what, boy, we gotta do better next time. Or having had the assessment, they realize, and they might have had some feedback from their regulator, and they immediately determine that, you know what, we need help. And we need to bring in, and they identified you, they brought you in as the MLRO. That says a couple of things. First of all, if they brought you in, suggests that they're going to give you some latitude to do some things. And so that's the first thing you want to think about. You are this powerful MLRO. And so let us, again, some of the points I mentioned, would be important at this point. You have already developed the kind of institution you're dealing with. The type of institution you're dealing with, even at the risk of sounding repetitious, I must say this. Do not ever choose an institution that you cannot sufficiently develop. If you cannot answer all of the questions based on the institution you develop, go to another institution, develop another institution, choose another sector, choose something that you can develop, something that you can address all of the 9 concerns that they raise. If you cannot do that, keep searching. But make sure when you choose a sector, when you choose a type of financial institution, that institution, you can raise the concern, and not only raise the concern, you can create remedial actions towards addressing all of these concerns. And so you will look in your material, you will look back at the role of the MLRO to see where your power is, your responsibilities are, what your duties are as the MLRO, what does that job entail? That's the first thing you want to do. Go back to the material, look at the MLRO. The next thing you want to do is, after you would have chosen the institution, you then want to you may want to go back to the unit that talks about how do you go about implementing a strong AML CFT program. Anybody remember that unit? There was a unit that talks about how do you go about developing an AML program, a strong AML program. You want to start to think about drawing on information that would speak to a strong AML CFT program. Remember now, you have all this body of information You're not even confined to their folder. If you want to, you can do research on how do you go about developing a strong AML CFT program. Once you would have done that, you have all this information set around you, then you fine-tune that and you start to look at certain subject matter. There is a unit that speaks to the whole issue of governance and culture. Then you start to draw on the whole issue of corporate governance. Corporate governance is at the helm of any institution that is going to have a strong AML program. Let me put that another way. The strength of the AML CFT program within an institution is only as good as its corporate governance regime. And so that they mention corporate governance, you want to go to town by hitting strong on the point that this institution needs to strengthen the corporate governance regime. Make sure that the governance program, the leadership, that everything is right at the board level. We talk also about the tone at the top. And so you could say as a part of strengthening the governance regime, the board members are reminded of their responsibility. Then you remember that you're writing to the board. You want to incorporate something there that speaks to the responsibility of the board of directors and senior management. You have material on that. We know that if the board of directors, if senior management has not bought into the AML program, has not signed off on the AML program, that's a problem. Fortunately for you, this question suggests that the board of directors saw the regulatory concerns and are concerned about the points raised by the regulators. And so you talk about it from a governance standpoint, that you need to put these things in place, that we need to strengthen the culture. We spoke earlier about the importance of having the right culture. So draw on the material that speaks to having the right culture, that everybody in the institution has bought into the AML program. Step back though, that the board is on board with the AML program, and that the board insists, the culture of this institution is that we have strong AML CFT compliance. You look at the next point, AML CFT systems and controls. That's throughout your material. You want to ensure that you recommend that in order to address the regulatory concerns, we have to strengthen the AML CFT regime in this company. Systems and controls. Systems and controls. You can go to town on that. That you have the right systems. When you talk about systems, you're talking about all those things that lend to having policies, procedures in place. And so you may want to take that back to the standpoint that we need to review the AML CFT policies and procedures, because the AML CFT program within an institution is only as strong as the AML policies and procedures. Put another way, if you do not have strong policies and procedures in place, you're not going to do well with your AML CFT program. So that you have good systems in place, that you have controls in place. Not only do you have policies and procedures, you have mechanisms in place to test the strength of those policies and procedures. That's your controls. It is not good enough for you to say that all suspicions ought to be reported to the MLRO within a specified period of time and forwarded to the FIU within a specified period of time. That could be written within the institution But does anybody check to see if that is actually occurring? That's your control. Does anybody check to see that even though the institution says that there ought to be a training program, who checks to see whether or not staff are trained? Who checks to see whether or not? The next point is AML CFT resourcing. You're writing again to the board. You have a great opportunity to say to the board, in order to have a good AML CFT program, you have to be willing to fund it. You have to be able to you have to be willing, board, to put the resources in place to ensure that the AML CFT program works. That might mean strengthening the staff complement. It might mean reorganizing some staff. It might mean purchasing AML CFT software, training software. Whatever it takes, you need to put the resources in place. In other words, using the colloquialism, you need to put your money where your... Exactly. So you're saying to the board, in order for us to address the identified weaknesses, we need you to commit the requisite resources. Then you go to the next point that speaks of due diligence procedures. It says a brief overview will suffice. Well, since they provide that little tip there that you don't need to do the whole gamut of CDD, but it's always useful when you're talking about CDD is to always talk about it from a risk-based perspective. But I want to share this point here. When you're talking about CDD, you want to share that the institution ought to have a regime in place for simplified or reduced due diligence, where the risks are minimal. Equally, the institution ought to have enhanced due diligence procedures where the risks are higher. Point being, the CDD regime ought to be flexible. Then we talk about the adoption of a risk-based approach. Risk-based approach. We know that you can recommend to the board that risk-based approach allows this institution to use its AML CFT resources in the most effective manner. Risk-based means that we are going to have a regime in place that is so flexible that it's not a one-size-fits-all. It is not a broad brush approach. It is appropriate to customer base, our product line, and the services we provide. Risk-based means that we are going to employ the level of oversight that is appropriate for the situation. Once again, risk-based says if somebody, you have a prospective customer or existing customer that poses a low level of risk, either based on the profile of that customer or based on the product that that customer is requesting or the service that we're providing to that customer, if the risk is deemed to be low or minimal, then we employ simplified due diligence. Conversely, if you have a customer, prospective customer, and they pose a higher level of risk for money laundering, terrorism financing, we employ enhanced due diligence. We know, and if you want to, that can take you down the road. I just love the subject matter of politically exposed persons when you're talking about high risk. You can go to town on that. I mean, because particularly you don't want to do it in the Bahamian context because 95% of us are PEPs. We either work somewhere or we have a cousin work somewhere or some cousin. Everybody has a cousin in the House or the Senate. But when we talk about enhanced due diligence, you want to explore the subject matter of those circumstances that lend to higher risk for money laundering. 3 right off the bat, I mean right off the top of my head, 3 are politically exposed persons, correspondent banking, and wire transfer, right off the top of my head. So if you want to deal with EDD, you talk about those 3 scenarios.
What's the last one, sorry?
Wire transfers. In fact, wire transfers are so critical that the FATF has dedicated, and you want to put this in your paper if you're writing this, the wire transfers are so critical that the FATF designated a recommendation solely for wire transfer. PEPs are so critical that they designated a whole recommendation specifically to PEPs. You see what I mean when I say draw in the FATF recommendation? You're going to look good when you do that. So always keep the 40 recommendations on hand. Monitoring system. There's a whole unit on transactions monitoring. Draw on that. It is not good enough to just engage a customer, provide services to a customer. Somebody at some point in time ought to monitor those transactions, monitor either at the point of when the service is being provided, or monitor from the standpoint that somebody comes back and connects the dot and say, did we get all the documents we should have gotten? Does everything pan out? Is there anything suspicious about this? Does this match with the profile we created on this customer? Monitoring is very, very important. In fact, it's really at the stage of monitoring that most suspicion come to light. And so if you want to speak of monitoring, that can take you down the road of you ought to have monitoring programs in place that identifies whether a customer, whether their actions are consistent with their profile. Now we know that anytime you are onboarding a customer, you would have obtained certain information from that customer, you would have created a profile on that customer. When you're monitoring the transaction, because when you're onboarding them, you don't know them yet. When you're monitoring their transactions, you have an opportunity then to determine whether that person is who you thought he or she was, and whether the relationship, because you really created a relationship, whether the relationship you created is going in the way you thought it would go. That's what monitoring does. The next thing is record keeping. Again, you want to put in your paper that record keeping is so important. You're saying this to the board now. Please be reminded that record keeping is so critical, as has been determined by the Financial Action Task Force in Recommendation 11, which we must comply with. We are mandated to ensure that we maintain records on all our customers, we maintain records on all of our transactions, that we maintain them in such a manner, whether we keep them in micro, whatever you do, however we maintain our records, it is important that we adhere to global standards on record keeping. And so that's another area that you can really, really develop and get some good information on record keeping. You're talking about not only the types of records which ought to be maintained, you're talking about the maintenance of the record, the time period for maintaining the records. You may talk about the manner in which records ought to be kept. You ought to talk about the disposal of records, meaning that records ought not be destroyed unless you got consent from law enforcement. Even after a business relationship has been closed, the law still requires that records ought to be kept for a certain length of time, even after the close of the relationship. So you can just bring so much into play there. I believe in the local context, it requires certainly I know the Compliance Commission requires that its constituents maintain records for at least 5 years after the termination of the relationship. However, there's a proviso there that if law enforcement wants you to keep it even longer than that, you cannot destroy the records unless law enforcement says so. Then AML CFP training. Oh, gee, you can write pages on this one. The importance of having a strong AML CFP training program. That is critical. That is very important because you can just come at that from so many angles. Sir, Madam Director, in the board of directors, consideration ought to be given to the fact that if our staff had been trained in suspicion or suspicious activity, or if they had been trained in how to monitor transactions, if they had been trained in developing internal compliance reviews, if they had been trained, these things would not have happened. And so going forward, we need to strengthen the training program. Going forward, we need to ensure that, well, first of all, we need to review the training material to ensure that we address all of the material weaknesses identified by the regulators. And once we have a strong training program in place, it is less likely that we would have a recurrence of some of the things that happened last time, or that the regulators identified. Because, I mean, everything rises and falls with training. You can talk about the importance of training across the entire institution. You may introduce, in fact, because it is not said here, you may want to explore and make a strong recommendation that the first thing you would wish to do as the newly appointed MLRO is to convene a training session for the board of directors. And senior management, tell them bring all the big guns. You'll come sit down and listen to what you ought to know. Subsequent to that, we want to ensure that once training has been offered to the board of directors and senior management, that the training is offered across the entire institution.
One question.
We want to
just for clarity as it relates to writing, we are still writing this paper in the third person, correct? Rather than the first.
Yes.
Yeah, because I just want to.
But sorry, no, the writing in the first person. You're drafting a paper.
In the first person.
You're drafting a paper. Remember, you're the MLRO.
Yes.
And you're drafting a paper to the board of directors. You're writing to them and saying, as the MLRO, these are remember all the things we said earlier. As the MLRO, you want to, first of all, you're reminding them of your obligation. I am the MLRO. As the MLRO, I thank you for this opportunity. First of all, you may want to thank them for bringing you in on board. You know, some little nicety like that. And I wish to respectfully remind you of the obligations on my part, or my role as the MLRO requires that I do ABC, which I am now doing by way of this presentation to you. And so everything you do, you will be writing in the first person. You are writing to the board. You are being asked you have been asked to draft a paper for the board. And so you are drafting this paper. You are writing to the board of directors saying, I am the MLRO. I am writing to you as the MLRO. And then this whole business, just let me say another point on training. You also want to put in there, in addition to the importance of having training across the institution, you also want to further recommend that there be training tailored specifically for various functions within the institution. Meaning you will have a training program that is tailored for your frontline people. A training program, and again, based on the institution. Let us say if you were to have chosen an insurance company, you would have training, you would recommend training for your frontline customer representative. You want to also recommend training for the agents, training or sales staff, whatever they call it, whatever you choose to call them. Training for your back office people who are checking, in terms of premiums as they come in, cashiers and the like. Training from the standpoint of obviously the MLRO and his or her team. So you can look at training from so many perspectives. The main point is you want to have not just sector-specific training, you want to have task-specific training. Meaning training geared towards, an in-house training geared towards the specific task that persons perform. The point is to ensure that the training is not so generic and hierum that it just doesn't speak to the tasks that people ought to be performing. And also you want to bring in the point that when people are trained, when people are hired, that there ought to be a requirement that those persons are trained within a specified period of time. I think your book suggests, I saw, was it Jersey or the UK? One of them suggests that persons ought to be trained 10 days within their engagement. Now we know that's an exceptionally high standard. Well, it depends on the type of training, but what you want to do is, and in fact, it speaks of a system whereby persons are not really even given a job description until they receive AML CFT training, meaning that you don't even let them interact with customers until they would have gotten training. So training is something that you can go to town on. And then your suspicious activity report regime. Remember now that SAR and STRs, they use interchangeably. What you would want to do, you want to try to remain consistent. If you start out using SAR, continue with SAR. If you use STRs, continue with STRs. The main point is another area that you can just find so much information on, that there is a requirement for suspicious suspicious activity reporting, that you want to make strong recommendation to the board of directors that we want to ensure that this institution has a regime in place for reporting suspicion. You want to remind the board that as the money laundering reporting officer, your standard is that suspicion ought to be reported to you within a given period of time. You want to talk about the mode of reporting. You may say that your requirement, you understand that, and you have recognized that in the past persons were able to receive suspicion by way of email or something like that. You may want higher standards where all suspicion ought to come in written form. You may want to say that suspicions leaving this institution, going to law enforcement, going to the financial intelligence unit, that they meet certain criteria. So suspicious activity reports, another point you can go to town on. You can also talk about feedback in suspicious activity reporting. You may want to talk about where, based on your institution, based on the sector you chose, the type of institution you chose, you may want to put forth the case that the number of SARs we have is not reflective of this type of institution. And you can suggest by that perhaps people do not recognize sufficiently all of the red flags that they ought to be looking for, and that the SAR regime ought to be strengthened. Remember, you you would want to make sure allocate sufficient time so that you can do your assignment properly. You fortunately now, unlike in days past where you had to actually physically count each word and you wonder where A or R is a full word. When you're typing on the system now, it gives you word count. 100 words, make sure you stay within that parameter. You are not heavily criticized and chastised if you go outside of that within a reasonable amount. If you go 3,502, I'm not going to kill you for that. If you're below 2,500, that's a concern. If you're far below that, that's a serious concern. However, the overriding point is make sure you build a good house. Make sure you have quality information presented in a concise and comprehensive manner. Remember to draw on all of the material you have, but do so in a comprehensive manner, meaning that you don't just drop things here, there, and everything. You're building a house, you're building a story. Remember, and I like to suggest this to my classes. When you're talking about anti-money laundering, combating the financing of terrorism, when you're talking about the material in your binders, if you really want to know whether you understand the material, attempt to explain a concept to somebody. Attempt to explain it to somebody. When you're doing your assignment, bounce it off some people. Bounce it off at least one person. Let them read it. Bounce it off somebody who not is in the AML field, somebody who knows nothing about anti-money laundering, and see if they understand, see if they can grasp what you're trying to convey. If they read it and say, boy, they're saying, I don't understand, what in the world you're talking about? That's a telltale sign that perhaps it is not as clear as it can be. Because remember now, they want to understand on the other side of the world that you understand the concepts. And the way you can best demonstrate that you understand the concept is to have somebody share it with somebody and have that person realize that, okay, I know what he's talking about, I know what she's talking about. Think about this too. When you're talking about either if it's for answering this assignment or doing your final exam or just speaking to somebody in general about the AML CFT. Think about it from this standpoint. Use the scenario of the institution belonging to you. Whatever concept you're trying to convey. If you're reading something on whatever subject matter it is in this book, do it from the standpoint that this is my institution. Not only that, I invested all my resources, my retirement money, everything hinges on this institution that I created. What type measures do I want in place to ensure that my investment is secure? If I have established this institution, what mechanisms do I want in place to ensure that the criminals are not able to infiltrate and abuse my institution? Right from that standpoint, right from a business standpoint, give that to somebody to read, and I bet it will make sense to them if you personalize it. If you say, everything that I have is invested in this institution. My future rests on the survival, the sustainability of this institution. Therefore, I want to make sure that the AML program is as strong as it can be. Whether it's SDR, internal reporting, monitoring, whatever it is, I want to ensure that those things are in place because I cannot lose my money. Make sense? Look at it from that standpoint. Let me share with you in closing, I wish to say to you that while you are writing your assignment, I just thought I would share those points with you today. How many of you, and I'm not attempting to be facetious at all, how many of you are, in your view, well on your way or finish your assignment? That's great.
Especially after the day.
Okay.
Yeah, but I still want to, again, not to belabor it, Mr. Thompson, and I heard what you said earlier. I know that there is a document from advising against first person and writing in the third person to give that professional look. Now, if there's an exception and this one is different, then I just wanted to double check that. I did see something indicating that it is advisable to write third person rather than I.
Let me say, I've seen it done both ways.
Okay.
Let me find out, and I will do that this week, this coming week. I will find out if there is a preference. Let me find out. Yes, I'll do that.
Yeah.
Again, if you look at the ICT website, it has some useful tips there. I'll get back to you on that.
I saw something on that.
Okay.
I didn't bring it. I thought it was in my bundle, but it's not
Okay.
here.
Okay. I will check that. But again, the point is, I've seen it done both ways. And I think the overriding point, I appreciate the question, the overriding point is, however you present it, that you present the information in a professional and concise manner, taking into account all of the information, answering the question as thoroughly as possible. Yes.
Seeing that this is going to the board of directors, could we do this in like a memo form, like a memorandum form?
You can. You can. Be careful though, because a lot of times a question will say, send the memorandum. Meaning that they're guiding you, they're steering you directly into memorandum.
Okay.
You have a bit of latitude here. If you take that approach, make sure that the format is done properly, and that you stay along those lines. Be careful too that that you don't start by way of a memo and then you sort of little ways down you start to go along the line of a personal letter and end by saying yours instead of yours, sweetie pie, whatever. Make sure that whichever route you take that you are consistent with that. That is drafting the memo. Drafting the memo. The next point you want to be. Did you get a copy of?
I got it.
Drafting the memo. Oh, sorry. One part of the questionnaire speaks about drafting the memo, drafting a paper to the board of directors. Remember, do not miss that they also ask for an implementation plan, and so you want to be careful there. Implementation plan, you're talking about time frames. You're talking about putting in there, specified time frames. You as the MLRO, you may want to establish short, medium, and long-term goals. You may say, and you may establish that in the short term, which you may want to call 6 months, however you determine. Whatever the short-term period is, we ought to do these things within the short term. In fact, some of these things will be so critical based on what you determine to be the regulatory concerns raised. You may say, these things are so urgent that we want these things done as a matter of urgency, and you may say these are the short-term goals, and you may set 30 days if it's that critical. If it is something that is really, really so critical that it can affect the viability of your institution, it can cause you serious regulatory sanctions. You may want to have those matters, recommend that those matters be addressed as a matter of urgency. So you want to establish short-term goals. You want to establish some medium-term goals, which you may push out to 6 months. You may push out to a 12-month period if they're not critical. Then there's some other things that you may want to say as the MLRO in the long run. These are my long-term goals. Overall, you want to see the AML program strengthened. There are some things like, perhaps this whole business of something that is not critical. Something like the monitoring will be very critical. Suspicious transactions reporting will be very critical. Something like benchmarking exercise. You may say, perhaps a little later on down, we want to benchmark the sector that you chose. You may want to recommend that they do a jurisdictional benchmarking for the insurance industry. They may want to do a regional benchmarking exercise. Something that is not critical, something that you can live with for a while, you may want to set some long-term goals. Anytime you talk about an implementation plan, you must bring into play time frames. And so you must have clearly defined objectives, and those objectives ought to be in time frames. Any questions or concerns? Once again, feel free. At this point, I was having some challenges with my Outlook. I understand that I don't know what's happening with Outlook, but feel free to contact me if you want to send me a draft of your assignment. I'll be happy to have a look at it, and I wouldn't be marking it. I will be sharing some comments on it if you wish. I believe this is perhaps our last session before the review. Once again, I apologize for the communication glitch which occurred over the last couple of days, couple of weeks, I guess. And let me say to you, feel free to call me anytime if you have any questions or concerns. Did everybody put their email addresses or some point of contact on phone numbers? Okay. I'll try to get your email addresses from the Institute. I want to send you some information, just as I did for Unit 11. I want to send you something similar on Units 12 and 13. Something for you to, like I say, keep in the car while you're stuck in traffic, rather than carrying the big binder to work every day. Let me end by saying this to you. You're going to make it.
Amen.
So you can move your hand from under here. Yeah. She looks so sad there. Oh boy, you're going to be all right. You're going to be all right. Let me say also that anything that I can do to help in the coming weeks, feel free to call me. Feel free to call me if you want to bounce an idea. If there's some concept that you read that you want to discuss, feel free to call me and I'll make the time for us to discuss it. You're going to make it. You're going to make it. You're going to make it. Let me ask one further thing. Any mothers in here?
Yep.
How many? Brother Corley, please put your hand down. How many?
Like only one, two?
Two?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Any, and I'm not asking you your business, any mothers to be?
I thought it was going to ask if any father.
Yeah.
I should raise my hand. Equality, they ask.
I wouldn't.
I guess we up there on the
You got? You got?
Thank you.
I'll take one. Thank you.
You didn't get?
I pass it on.
Okay. And somebody said something about equality.
No, please let your father say. I say we. What let your father say?
Your wife is a mother, right?
Yes, she is.
Okay.
Oh, praise the Lord.
Okay. Let me say to you, to the mothers, happy Mother's Day. To all of you, let me say, I am here to assist you. I'm here to assist you. Whatever I can do to assist you as you are on the home stretch, feel free to call on me anytime and I will make the time to assist you. Thank you very much. Did anybody fall asleep?
No.
Nobody fell asleep. All the best to you. I just thought I would give you something very generic in terms of the pointers. All the best to you. Feel free to call on me. Have a great day. To the mothers, happy Mother's Day. To all of you, have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Wish you had you from class 1. I originally had you from class.
I'm here.
Oh my gosh.
You're going to be all right.
Yeah.
You're going to be all right.
Yeah. It's just sometimes, you know, with work.
Yeah,
Just like right now, I have to go to work.
What?
I gotta go to work.
Today? That's mean.
I put in late hours, 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock. I gotta go to work now.
Be careful. How long you work? I mean, how long today?
As soon as I get the work done. So hopefully by 5 the latest.
5?
So,
You have to be careful too because, I mean, traffic
Yeah.
is going to be crazy.
yeah.
Be careful where you pass. You don't want to get, you do not want to get stuck in this area, I can tell you. But you know, they already have police and thing all around the area.
I'm right in Cleveland House.
Yeah, but you don't want to, you don't want to get stuck in
Oh,
this area.
let me see your little book. I will make sure I have the right thing for it.
You know.
This is the
I guess.
financial action.
Oh, there's
Report.
two.
But sorry, one is the FATF's recommendation, and the next one is what they call the methodology. The methodology is the document they use for the mutual evaluation process.
Oh, that's why I have to basic. My own isn't that big.
No, that's
Yeah,
the
actually,
document.
that?
I just
No,
take
no,
them
no, you
together.
print it and then.
Okay.
That's the way I, my husband printed it.
Oh, okay.
I
Okay.
actually got those from the FATF's plenary. booklet.
Methodology for testing, okay.
I was trying to borrow some of them, but they was so, but they're so nice and handy.
Yeah.
Wow.
Because they said we can bring some of this into the exam.
Oh,
right?
yes, certainly. Oh, yeah.
Okay. That's why I said, let me print mine small because I got to I sent to the sample by guideline. And it's so big and bulky. So it's like, oh, there's another way to print it.
It's better to have it and not use it.
Yeah.
The worst thing you could be sitting down there and say, gosh, I should have brought that book with
Trust me, I bring it
me.
every day, as much as I can bring.
So, Mr. Thompson, they said using best practice guidelines. I don't know why I was thinking that there's an actual